The October rain drummed against my kitchen window in steady sheets, the kind of rain that makes Seattle feel even grayer than usual. I was standing at the counter, my hands submerged in sudsy water, washing the same coffee mug I'd used that morning. At 71, I'd developed these small routines that gave structure to days that otherwise felt increasingly empty. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I dried my hands on the faded yellow towel before picking it up. Meadow. My daughter's name lit up the screen, and I felt that familiar flutter of hope in my chest. She rarely called anymore, always too busy with her career at that tech company downtown. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying not to sound too eager. "Mom, hi." "Listen, I only have a minute between meetings." Her voice had that clipped efficiency I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "I just wanted to let you know that dinner's at 6:30 on Saturday. Wear something nice, okay? And please, don't bring that casserole you always make. We're having it catered." I felt a small sting at that last comment but pushed it aside. "Dinner? What dinner, honey?" "I don't think you mentioned the engagement dinner, Mom. For Kieran and me. I know I told you about it last month." There was an edge of impatience in her voice, that tone that suggested I was being forgetful again. But I wasn't forgetful. I kept a calendar. I wrote things down. I would have remembered my only daughter's engagement dinner. "Meadow, I don't think—" "Mom, I really have to go. Just be there at 6:30. The address is the same. Our apartment in Belltown. Love you. Bye." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there in my quiet kitchen, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the rain and trying to understand why my chest felt so tight. 20 minutes later, I checked my calendar. Nothing. I scrolled through our text messages. No mention of any engagement, let alone a dinner. But I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was getting old. The important thing was that my daughter was getting married, and I was invited to celebrate with her. I went to my closet and pulled out the navy dress I'd worn to my husband's funeral 3 years ago. It was the nicest thing I owned. The rest of the week crawled by. I called my son, Wesley, to ask if he knew about the dinner. He was living in Portland, working at some startup that I never quite understood. "Yeah, Mom, I know about it," he said, his voice distant. "I'm driving up Saturday morning." "Will Portia be there?" I asked, referring to his wife of 2 years. There was a pause. "Yeah, she'll be there." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but I couldn't pinpoint what. "Is everything okay, Wesley?" "Everything's fine, Mom. Look, I'm in the middle of something. I'll see you Saturday." Another deadline. Another conversation that left me feeling more alone than before. I spent Friday cleaning my small house in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, the modest 2-bedroom I'd moved into after selling the family home. The place where I'd raised both children now belonged to strangers. I'd used the money from the sale to help Wesley with his wedding and to give Meadow a down payment on her apartment. There wasn't much left over, but I lived on my late husband's pension and Social Security. I managed. Saturday arrived with clear skies, unusual for October in Seattle. I took the bus downtown, my good purse clutched in my lap, the navy dress pressed and perfect under my raincoat. The bus stop was 3 blocks from Meadow's building, and I walked slowly, my knees aching with each step. At 71, I'd learned to move more carefully, to take my time. I reached the sleek glass building in Belltown at 6:15, early as always. The doorman, a young man with kind eyes, smiled and held the door. I took the elevator to the 12th floor, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. I was going to meet my future son-in-law's family. I wanted to make a good impression. I knocked on apartment 1207 at exactly 6:30. The door swung open, and Meadow stood there in a stunning emerald dress, her dark hair swept up elegantly. Behind her, I could hear laughter and the gentle clink of wine glasses. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression shifting from surprise to something I couldn't quite read. "Mom, what are you doing here?" The question hit me like cold water. "The dinner, sweetheart. You told me to be here at 6:30. "Oh." She glanced back into the apartment, then stepped into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed behind her. "Didn't I tell you? The dinner was last night. Friday. Just for close family." The hallway tilted slightly. I reached out to steady myself against the wall. "Last night. But you said Saturday. You specifically said—" "No, Mom. It was definitely Friday. You must have gotten confused." She was speaking to me the way you'd speak to a child, slow and patient, and it made something inside me crack. Meadow, I have it written down. You called me on Monday. You said Saturday at 6:30. Mom, you're confused. It happens. You're getting older, and sometimes memories get mixed up. She placed a hand on my shoulder, and I could smell her expensive perfume. I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing. Maybe we can have lunch next week or something. From inside the apartment, I heard a woman's voice call out, Meadow, who's at the door? No one, just a neighbor, my daughter called back. Then, to me, in a whisper, I really need to get back inside. I'm sorry about the mix-up, Mom. She stepped back into the apartment, and the door closed with a soft click. I stood there in the empty hallway, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Through the door, I could hear the party continuing, laughter, music, the sound of people celebrating, and I was standing on the wrong side of it. Chapter 2. The Long Night. I don't remember much about the bus ride home. The city lights blurred past the rain-streaked windows, and I sat with my hands folded in my lap, staring at nothing. An elderly man across from me asked if I was all right, and I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. The truth was settling into my bones like the October chill, heavy and undeniable. My daughter had lied to me, not confused the dates, not forgotten to call, lied, deliberately given me the wrong day so I wouldn't be there. The realization kept circling in my mind like a vulture, landing and taking off, each time making the wound deeper. When I finally reached my house in Beacon Hill, it was past 8 o'clock. The porch light I'd left on cast long shadows across the front steps. I'd lived in this neighborhood for only 3 years, but it had never felt like home. How could it, when home was wherever my children were, and my children had stopped wanting me around? I hung my coat on the hook by the door, the navy dress suddenly feeling like a costume, a foolish old woman's attempt to be included. In the bathroom mirror, I looked at my face, the lines around my eyes, the gray hair I'd carefully styled that morning, the lipstick I'd applied so carefully. When had I become invisible to my own daughter? I changed into my nightgown and sat on the edge of my bed, but sleep was impossible. My mind kept replaying every moment of the past week, searching for signs I'd missed. Wesley's distant tone on the phone, the way Meadow had pulled the door closed, hiding me from her guests. Just a neighbor, she'd said, as if her own mother was no one. Around midnight, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out an old photo album from the bottom drawer of my dresser. The pages were yellowed, the photos fading, but the memories they held were sharp as glass. There was Meadow at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding my hand at the Pike Place market. Wesley at 7, covered in mud after a soccer game, proud as anything. Their father, Donald, young and handsome, before the cancer, before everything changed. I'd been 30 when I married Donald. He was 35, a mechanical engineer with Boeing, steady and kind. We'd wanted children right away, and Meadow came when I was 32, Wesley when I was 35. I'd been a teacher before that, high school English, but Donald and I agreed I'd stay home with the kids. Just for a few years, we'd said, just until they were in school. But somehow, those few years turned into forever. By the time both children were in high school and I thought about going back to teaching, Donald got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that gives you months instead of years. He died when I was 68, after 41 years of marriage. I'd used our savings to pay for treatments that didn't work. I'd refinanced the house to cover the medical bills. And when it was over, when I finally had to admit that I was a widow at 68 with almost nothing left, I'd sold the family home. The kids had been supportive, I thought, understanding. Meadow was 39 then, Wesley 36. Both had good jobs. Both were stable. When Wesley told me he was getting married to Portia, a woman he'd been dating for only 6 months, and that they wanted a big wedding, I'd given them $20,000 from the house sale. When Meadow found the apartment in Belltown and fell in love with it but was short on the down payment, I'd given her $30,000. Mom, you're the best, they'd both said. We'll pay you back. We promise. But of course, they never did. And I never asked. That's what mothers do, isn't it? We give without expecting return. We love without keeping score. Except somewhere along the way, without my noticing, the giving had become expected, and the love had become one-sided. I closed the photo album and put it back in the drawer. The house was cold. Or maybe I was cold. I couldn't tell. I pulled a blanket around my shoulders and sat in the dark living room, watching the street through the window. A few cars passed by, their headlights briefly illuminating the room before plunging it back into darkness. That's when my phone buzzed. A text message. My heart leaped. Maybe Meadow. Maybe an apology. Maybe an explanation that would make sense of everything. But when I picked up the phone, it was from a number I didn't recognize. "Hi, Mrs. Ashford. This is Keegan, Meadow's fiancé. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about tonight. I didn't know she hadn't told you the real date. That wasn't right. I hope you're okay." I stared at the message for a long time. So he knew. He knew what Meadow had done, and he'd felt guilty enough to reach out. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, "Thank you for your kindness, Keegan. Congratulations on your engagement." I didn't know what else to say. What was there to say? My daughter's fiancé had more compassion for me than my daughter did. The thought should have made me feel better, but it only made me feel worse. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the darkness outside my window gradually lighten to gray, then to the pale blue of dawn. I thought about calling Wesley, demanding to know if he'd been in on it, if he'd known I was being excluded. But I already knew the answer. He'd known. He'd been there last night while I stood in the hallway, confused and hurt. My children had become strangers. Or maybe I'd always been a stranger to them, and I was only now realizing it. Maybe all those years of sacrifice, all those times I'd put their needs before my own, all those moments I'd thought were building a bond between us. Maybe they'd just been me, alone, loving people who had learned to take that love for granted. The sun rose over Seattle, indifferent to my pain. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed and clean, and I sat in my living room wrapped in a blanket, feeling older than I'd ever felt before. 71 years on this earth, and I'd never felt more lost. Chapter 3. The pattern emerges. Sunday morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through my living room curtains. I'd finally dozed off around 5 a.m., curled up on the couch, and woke with a stiff neck and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Wesley, all from late last night. No calls from Meadow. I made coffee, the cheap grocery store brand I'd switched to after Donald died, and sat at my small kitchen table. The house felt too quiet. For 41 years, I'd had Donald's presence to fill the silence. Even in his last months, when he could barely speak, the house had felt alive. Now it was just me and the hum of the refrigerator. Wesley called again at 9. I almost didn't answer, but some ingrained sense of maternal duty made me pick up. "Mom, where were you last night?" I tried calling. His voice had that edge of accusation, as if I'd done something wrong, as if I'd been the one to lie. "I was here, Wesley. I was confused about the dinner." Apparently. There was a pause. "Yeah. Meadow said you got the dates mixed up. That must have been embarrassing for you." Embarrassing for me. Not cruel of her. Not wrong. Embarrassing for me, as if my humiliation was the natural consequence of my own failing memory rather than my daughter's deliberate deception. "Wesley, I had it written down. She told me Saturday." "Mom," he sighed, that long-suffering sigh I'd heard so many times lately. "Maybe you wrote it down wrong. It happens. You're not as young as you used to be. I'm 71, not senile. I didn't say you were senile, but you have to admit, you've been a bit scattered lately. Remember when you thought my birthday was in March? It's April, Mom. You've known that for 36 years. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right about that. I had gotten his birthday confused last year, but this was different. This was, "Look, Mom, I have to go. Portia and I are heading back to Portland. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Am I invited to the wedding?" The question came out before I could stop it. Small and pathetic. Another pause. More, what wedding? Meadow's wedding. To Keegan. Am I invited? Of course you're invited. You're her mother. Why would you even ask that? Because your sister didn't want me at her engagement dinner. Because I'm starting to realize I might not matter to either of you as much as I thought I did. Because I'm scared and confused and I don't recognize my own children anymore. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "You're right. Silly question. Drive safely, honey." After he hung up, I sat with my coffee going cold in my hands and tried to remember when things had started to change. When had my children stopped calling just to chat? When had our conversations become transactions, quick updates, logistical planning, rushed goodbyes? I pulled out my laptop, an old Dell that Donald had bought me years ago, and opened my email. I scrolled back through months of messages, looking for something I couldn't quite name. And then I found it. A pattern I'd been too close to see. January. Meadow asking to borrow $2,000 for a minor emergency. I'd sent it immediately, pulling from my already thin savings. She'd never paid it back, never even mentioned it again. March. Wesley calling to say his car needed major repairs and could I help. $1,500. Wired that same day. I'll get it back to you next month, Mom, I promise. He hadn't. May. Meadow again. This time needing $500 for a security deposit on a storage unit. Just until next paycheck, Mom. Except next paycheck came and went. And when I gently asked about it, she'd gotten defensive. God, Mom, I thought you gave me that. I didn't know it was a loan. I kept scrolling. June, July, August. Each month, one or both of them asking for money. Small amounts, usually. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. Nothing that seemed significant on its own. But together, I opened my bank statements and started tallying. Over the past year, I'd given my children nearly $20,000, not including the $50,000 from the house sale 2 years ago. $70,000 total, given to adult children who both earned more than I ever had, and who apparently couldn't even be bothered to invite me to family dinners. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. I felt sick, not because of the money, though God knows I couldn't afford it, but because of what the pattern revealed. I thought I was helping my children, building a relationship, showing love the only way I knew how. But maybe all I'd been doing was making myself useful, valuable, worth keeping around. And now, apparently, even that wasn't enough. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my spiral. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a young woman in a delivery uniform stood there with a large bouquet of flowers. Lorraine Ashford. Yes, these are for you. She handed me the arrangement, yellow roses, my favorite, and left. I carried them inside, my heart doing that hopeful flutter again. Maybe Meadow had realized her mistake. Maybe this was an apology. I pulled out the small card tucked among the stems. The handwriting was masculine, careful. Mrs. Ashford, I'm truly sorry about Friday night. You deserved better. The dinner was lovely, but it would have been lovelier with you there. With respect and best wishes, Keegan. Not from my daughter, from her fiancé, a man I'd never met, showing me more kindness than my own child. I set the flowers on the kitchen table and sat down heavily. The roses were beautiful, their scent filling my small kitchen, but they made me want to cry. How had I become this person? This woman whose own daughter couldn't stand to have her around. I'd devoted my entire adult life to my family. I'd given up my career, my independence, my savings. I'd nursed Donald through his illness, sacrificing the last years of my vitality to make his final months comfortable. And for what? The phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize with a Portland area code. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Ashford, this is Portia, Wesley's wife. I was surprised. Portia rarely called me directly. Hello, Portia. Is everything all right? She hesitated. I wanted to call and apologize. For Friday night, I told Wesley we should tell you the truth about the dinner, but he said Meadow insisted it was better this way. I felt horrible watching you stand in that hallway, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up. So Portia had been there. She'd seen me, humiliated and confused, and said nothing. And yet, here she was apologizing, which was more than either of my own children had done. I thank you for calling, Portia. That means more than you know. Mrs. Ashford, can I ask you something? And please know I'm asking this with respect, not judgment. Of course. Why do you keep giving them money? The question caught me off guard. I'm sorry. Wesley is always asking you for money. He makes good money at his job. We both do. But he's always calling you. And I know Meadow does the same thing. Why do you keep saying yes? I didn't have a good answer. Because they're my children. Because that's what mothers do. Because I'm afraid if I stop being useful, they'll stop wanting me around at all. I just want to help, I finally said. Portia was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Ashford, I don't think they need help. I think they need boundaries. And I think you need to stop letting them treat you this way. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by Keegan's yellow roses and thought about boundaries. I'd never been good at those. I'd been raised in a generation where mothers sacrificed, where love meant putting everyone else first, where saying no to your children was tantamount to failing as a parent. But maybe that's exactly what had gone wrong. Maybe by never saying no, by always being available, by giving until I had nothing left, I'd taught my children that I didn't matter, that my time, my money, my feelings, they were all expendable. They were all less important than their needs, their wants, their convenience. Maybe Portia was right. Maybe what they needed wasn't more money or more accommodation. Maybe what they needed was for their mother to finally stand up and say, "Enough." But the thought terrified me, because if I stopped giving, if I stopped bending, if I stopped being the mother they expected me to be, would they want me at all? Chapter 4. The Financial Reality. Monday morning. I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I made an appointment with a financial advisor at the bank. I'd been managing, barely, on Donald's pension and my Social Security, but managing had started to mean skipping meals, keeping the heat low enough that I wore sweaters indoors, and lying awake at night worrying about every unexpected expense. The appointment was at 2 p.m. I took the bus downtown, the same route I'd taken Saturday night, and tried not to think about standing in Meadows' hallway. The bank was in a modern building near Pike Place Market, all glass and steel, intimidatingly professional. The advisor, a woman named Sarah Chen who looked to be in her 40s, greeted me with a warm smile and led me to a small office. "So, Mrs. Ashford, what brings you in today?" I explained my situation as clinically as I could. Widow, living on a fixed income, wanted to make sure I was on track financially. Sarah pulled up my accounts on her computer, and I watched her face carefully as she scrolled through the numbers. Her smile faded. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you need to hear this. Your financial situation is concerning. I know I'm not wealthy, but it's not about wealth. It's about sustainability. Based on your current rate of spending and withdrawal, you'll deplete your savings in approximately 3 years, maybe less if you have any major medical expenses or home repairs. 3 years. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I live very modestly. I don't spend much at all." Sarah turned the monitor so I could see it. "And these large withdrawals, 2,000 here, 1,500 here, 500 here, 3,000 here, they're happening almost monthly. What are these for?" "My children," I said quietly. "They needed help." Sarah's expression softened. "Mrs. Ashford, I see this more often than you'd think. Adult children who are financially stable but still lean on their aging parents. Can I ask, do your children know about your financial situation? I don't want to burden them, but you're comfortable being burdened by them." The question hung in the air. I had no answer for it. Sarah pulled out a calculator and started showing me numbers. If I stopped the large withdrawals immediately, maintained my current minimal spending, and was very careful, I might have enough to last until I was 85, maybe 90 if I was lucky and healthy. But that assumed no emergencies, no inflation beyond the normal rate, no unexpected medical costs. "What about after that?" I asked. "After that, you'd be dependent on others, probably your children." "Do you have other family?" "No, just Meadow and Wesley." Sarah closed her laptop and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to speak to you as someone who cares, not just as your financial advisor. You're 71 years old. You've worked hard your whole life, and you deserve to live your remaining years with dignity and security. What you don't deserve is to sacrifice your financial stability for adult children who should be supporting themselves. They're not struggling," I heard myself say. "They both have good jobs. Then why are they asking you for money?" It was the same question Portia had asked, and I still didn't have a good answer. Because it's easy. Because I've never said no. Because somewhere along the way, our relationship became transactional, and money was the currency that kept them in my life. Sarah helped me create a budget. It was stark and unforgiving. I needed to cut my spending by 20%, which meant cheaper food, no cable TV, minimal heating in the winter, and absolutely no more large withdrawals for my children. "What if they really need it?" I asked. "And what if there's an emergency? Then they can take out a loan like any other adult. Mrs. Ashford, you're not a bank, you're their mother, and you've done more than enough." When I left the bank, it was raining again. That soft Seattle drizzle that soaks you before you realize you're wet. I walked slowly to the bus stop, thinking about everything Sarah had said. 3 years. That's all I had left if I kept going the way I was going. 3 years before, I'd be completely dependent on Meadow and Wesley, the same children who couldn't even be bothered to invite me to dinner. The thought made me feel sick with fear, but it also made me angry. Really, deeply angry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. That evening, as I sat in my living room with a bowl of soup for dinner, cheaper than a full meal, my phone rang. Wesley. Hey, Mom, quick question. My car insurance is due, and I'm a little short this month. Could you spot me $800? I'll pay you back next month. Promise. The words came out automatically. Of course, honey, Then I stopped. I looked around my small living room, at the thermostat set to 60 degrees, at the stack of bills on the coffee table that I'd been strategically paying to avoid late fees. I thought about Sarah's words. 3 years. Actually, Wesley, I can't. Silence. Then, what do you mean, you can't? It's only $800. I mean, I can't afford it. I'm on a fixed income and I need to be more careful with my money. Mom, come on. You gave Meadow money for her storage unit just a few months ago. I know, and I shouldn't have. I can't keep doing this, Wesley. His voice changed, got harder. Are you serious right now? After everything I've done for you? The words stunned me. Everything you've done for me. Yeah, Mom, everything. Who drove up when your internet wasn't working? Who helped you move into that house? Who spent hours helping you figure out Dad's paperwork after he died? And now you can't help me out with $800. I wanted to remind him that I'd paid him $500 for helping me move. That the 9 hours he'd spent with Dad's paperwork was actually one afternoon, during which I'd made him lunch and given him $3,000 that he'd said was for lawyer fees, that I later discovered he never incurred. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, I'm sorry, Wesley. I just can't. You know what, Mom? Fine. I'll figure it out myself. Like I always do. He hung up. I sat holding the phone, my hands shaking. I'd just said no to my son for the first time in his adult life, and it felt like I'd jumped off a cliff. Would he call back? Would he apologize? Or was this it? Was this the moment our relationship ended because I'd finally stopped being useful? An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Meadow. Wesley told me you're refusing to help him. Really? Mom? That's pretty selfish. I stared at the text for a long time. Selfish. I was selfish for not giving away money I didn't have, for trying to ensure I wouldn't be destitute in my old age, for finally, after 71 years, putting my own needs first. I typed and deleted several responses. Finally, I wrote, I love you both, but I can't keep doing this. I hope you can understand. Her response came immediately. Whatever. Don't expect us to bail you out when you need help. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark, listening to the rain and wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my life, or if I'd finally started to save it. Chapter 5. The Week of Silence. The silence that followed was deafening. No calls, no texts, just checking in, messages. For the first time in my adult life, my phone sat quiet for days at a time, and each day of silence confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. My relationship with my children had been conditional. As long as I was useful, I was welcome. The moment I set a boundary, I became disposable. I spent that week taking long walks through my neighborhood, even in the rain. Beacon Hill had always been a working-class area, full of modest homes and families just trying to get by. I'd never really gotten to know my neighbors in the 3 years I'd lived there. I'd been too busy grieving Donald, too focused on maintaining connections with my children, too lost in my own small world. On Wednesday, I was walking past a community center when I noticed a sign, Senior Support Group, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. All welcome. I'd never been much of a joiner, never felt comfortable in group settings, but something about that afternoon, the rain, the silence from my children, the crushing weight of loneliness, made me open the door and walk inside. The room was small and warm, with a circle of folding chairs and a coffee maker gurgling in the corner. 5 other people were already there, all women around my age. A woman with short silver hair and kind eyes waved me over. First time, come sit. I'm Diana Kowalski. I run the group, though run is a generous word for what we do here. Mostly we just talk and drink bad coffee. I introduced myself and sat down, feeling awkward and exposed. But Diana had a way of making everything feel safe, and soon we were going around the circle, each person sharing what had brought them there that day. When it was my turn, I found myself telling them everything. The engagement dinner I wasn't invited to, the pattern of financial exploitation, the silence since I'd said no. I expected judgment or platitudes, but instead, I got understanding nods and murmurs of recognition. "Oh, honey," said a woman named Ruth Yamamoto, who'd introduced herself as 76 and a widow of 5 years. "I could have written your story myself. My son moved to California 15 years ago and only calls when he needs money. Last year, I sent him $12,000 for what he said was a business investment. Found out later he used it for a vacation to Hawaii. At least your kid calls," added Francine Okonkwo, 69, as with a bitter laugh. "Mine just sends passive-aggressive emails about how I'm a terrible grandmother because I don't fly across the country 3 times a year to babysit." We talked for 2 hours. Each woman had a story that echoed my own in different ways. Adult children who treated them more like ATMs or servants than parents, who took and took until there was nothing left to give, who made them feel guilty for having needs of their own. By the end of the session, I felt both better and worse. Better because I wasn't alone. Worse because I realized how common this was, how many women my age were living with this same pain. "The hard part," Diana said as we were cleaning up the coffee cups, "is accepting that your children might never change. You can hope they will. You can work on yourself, but you can't control them. All you can control is how you respond." "But they're my children," I said. "How do I just give up on them?" "You're not giving up on them. You're giving up on the fantasy of who you thought they were. There's a difference." I walked home slowly, Diana's words circling in my mind. A fantasy. Was that what I'd been living in? Had I been so invested in the idea of my loving, grateful children that I'd ignored who they actually were? That night, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I called my old friend, Helen Fitzgerald. We'd taught together years ago, before I'd stopped working to raise the kids. We'd kept in touch sporadically over the years, though I'd been so consumed with Donald's illness and then my grief that I'd let the friendship lapse. Lorraine? Oh my God, it's been ages." Helen's voice was warm, genuinely pleased. "How are you?" We talked for an hour. I told her about Donald, about the house, about the kids. She told me about her life, her 3 daughters, her retirement, her volunteer work at the library. When I mentioned the engagement dinner, she was silent for a long moment. "Lorraine, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you years ago. Your kids are spoiled. I know that's harsh, but it's true. Even when they were teenagers, they talked to you like you were their servant. I remember thinking at the time that you needed to be firmer with them, but I didn't want to overstep." Her words stung, but they also rang true. I thought about all the times I'd jumped to meet their demands, all the times I'd rearranged my life to accommodate theirs, all the times I'd accepted being treated as an inconvenience rather than a person. "It's not too late to change things," Helen said gently. "You're 71, not dead. You still have years ahead of you. Don't waste them waiting for people who don't appreciate you." After we hung up, I sat with Helen's words and thought about my life. What would it look like if I stopped defining myself by my relationship with Meadow and Wesley? If I stopped waiting for them to call, stopped making excuses for their behavior, stopped hoping that maybe this time they'd remember I existed without needing something. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after I'd said no to Wesley, my phone finally rang. Meadow. My heart leaped despite everything, despite the hurt, despite my newfound resolve. She was my daughter. I loved her. Maybe she was calling to apologize, to bridge the gap between us. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Keegan and I are getting married in December, and we're working on the guest list. Here's the thing. We're doing a small wedding, just immediate family and close friends, so we're limiting +1s. Okay? So you can come, obviously, but we can't give you a +1. I know you've been talking about maybe seeing someone, and I just wanted to be upfront that we can't accommodate that. I hadn't been talking about seeing anyone. I hadn't even thought about dating since Donald died. What was she talking about? Meadow, I'm not seeing anyone. Oh, well, good then. That makes it easier. Anyway, the wedding's on December 14th. It's at a venue in Bellevue. Pretty formal. I'll send you the details. December 14th is a Saturday? I asked, my stomach already sinking. Yeah, 6 p.m. Can you send me the information now? In writing. There was a pause. Why? Because last time, there seemed to be some confusion about the date and time. Her voice went cold. Mom, that was your confusion, not mine. I don't appreciate you implying that I lied to you. I'm not implying anything. I just want to make sure I have the correct information. You know what? Forget it. I don't need this drama. I'll send you an official invitation when they're printed, just like everyone else. And maybe think about whether you actually want to come, because you're being pretty hostile right now. She hung up. I sat there, stunned. I'd asked for written confirmation of my own daughter's wedding date, and somehow I was the one being hostile. Somehow I was the one creating drama. I looked around my small living room, the worn furniture, the blank walls, the quiet that had become my constant companion. For 71 years, I'd played by the rules. Be a good daughter, a good wife, a good mother. Put everyone else first. Don't make waves. Don't ask for too much. Don't expect to be treated with basic respect because that's selfish. That's demanding. That's not what good mothers do. And where had it gotten me? Alone in a house I couldn't afford, with children who saw me as an obligation at best, and an ATM at worst, waiting for scraps of affection that never came. Maybe, I thought, it was time to stop playing by those rules. Maybe it was time to write my own. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. November arrived with the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. I kept my thermostat at 60 degrees to save money, wearing layers of sweaters inside my house like an old woman in a Victorian novel, which, I supposed, was exactly what I was. The formal wedding invitation arrived in the mail. Thick, expensive cardstock with gold lettering. Mrs. Lorraine Ashford was written in calligraphy across the envelope, but there was no return address, no personal note, nothing to indicate this was from my daughter. The wedding was indeed December 14th at 6 p.m., at a venue called the Waterfront at Bellevue. I looked it up online. It was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the Seattle area, with views of Lake Washington and a minimum spend of $50,000. I wondered if Meadow and Keegan were paying for it themselves, or if his parents were footing the bill. Either way, it clearly wasn't a small, intimate affair, like she'd claimed. The invitation included a card about gift registries. I looked at the list: high-end kitchen appliances, luxury bedding, expensive cookware. Every item cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I closed the website and put the invitation on my refrigerator, where it mocked me every time I walked past. The support group on Wednesdays had become my lifeline. Diana, Ruth, Francine, and the others provided something I hadn't realized I'd been missing: validation. They understood what it felt like to love people who didn't love you back the same way, to give until you had nothing left, to slowly realize that the relationship you thought you had was actually something else entirely. Have they called at all? Diana asked me one Wednesday in mid-November. Just Meadow. About the wedding. No real conversation. Wesley hasn't called once. Do you miss them? I had to think about that. I miss who I thought they were. I don't think I miss who they actually are. Does that make me a terrible mother? It makes you human, Ruth said. I went through the same thing with my son. Once I stopped sending money, he disappeared completely. It's been 8 months now. At first, I was devastated. Now, I'm starting to realize my life is actually more peaceful without the constant anxiety of waiting for his next demand. That night, as I was heating up a can of soup for dinner, my meals had gotten simpler and cheaper as my budget tightened. There was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my neighborhood wasn't the kind of place where people dropped by unannounced. When I looked through the peephole, I was shocked to see Wesley standing there. I opened the door. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, tired around the eyes. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe he'd come to apologize. Maybe we could talk this through. Hey, Mom. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, tracking rain across my small entryway. We need to talk. Of course. Do you want some tea? No, I don't want tea. His voice was sharp, impatient. I drove all the way up from Portland because I couldn't believe what Meadow told me. Is it true you're not giving her a wedding gift? The question caught me off guard. I haven't decided yet what to give her. She said you looked at the registry and didn't buy anything. Wesley, everything on that registry costs hundreds of dollars. I can't afford. You can't afford it? Mom, it's your daughter's wedding. You find a way. That's what parents do. I felt something inside me snap. Maybe it was the cold in my house, kept low to save money I didn't have. Maybe it was the cheap soup I'd been eating for 3 days straight. Maybe it was the fact that my own son had driven 3 hours to demand I give his sister a gift, but couldn't be bothered to call just to see how I was doing. No, I said quietly. That's not what parents do. What parents do is raise their children to be independent, functioning adults. What I did was raise 2 people who think I'm an ATM who occasionally offers emotional labor. Wesley's face flushed red. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time either of you called me without needing something? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Really asked. When was the last time you treated me like I mattered? We're here now, aren't we? We invited you to the wedding. After lying to me about the engagement dinner, and you're only here now to demand I spend money I don't have on a gift for a daughter who can barely be bothered to speak to me. God, Mom, when did you become so bitter? The word hit me like a slap. Bitter. As if setting boundaries after a lifetime of giving was bitterness. As if asking for basic respect was being difficult. I'm not bitter, Wesley. I'm just done. Done with what? Done pretending that this, I gestured between us, is a real relationship. Done sacrificing everything for children who don't appreciate it. Done being treated like I'm an obligation instead of a person. Wesley stood up, his face hard. You know what? Fine. If that's how you feel, then don't come to the wedding. Neither of us wants you there anyway. The words hung in the air between us, finally spoken aloud. The truth I'd known but hadn't wanted to face. They didn't want me there. They didn't want me anywhere, except when they needed something from me. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of my house. Now. He stared at me for a long moment, shocked. I'd never spoken to him like that before. Never told him to leave. Never stood up for myself. But I was standing up now, and I wasn't going to back down. You're really going to do this. You're going to choose this moment, right before your daughter's wedding, to have some kind of breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown. I'm having a revelation. There's a difference. Now please leave. He left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in my quiet house, shaking, and waited to feel regret. Waited for the guilt to crash over me, the fear that I'd just ruined everything, the panic that I'd never see my children again. But it didn't come. Instead, what I felt was something like relief. I'd finally said it. I'd finally stood up. And while I didn't feel good exactly, I felt less helpless than I had in months. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Meadow. Wesley just called. I can't believe you. After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us. Don't bother coming to the wedding. You're not welcome. I read the text 3 times, and with each reading, my sadness hardened into something else. Anger. Real. Clean anger at the unfairness of it all. Everything they'd done for me. What had they done for me? A few phone calls a month. Obligatory visits on holidays where they checked their phones the whole time. The privilege of paying for things they should have paid for themselves. I typed out a response. You're right. I won't be there. I hope you have a beautiful wedding. I truly do. But I'm done letting you both treat me this way. When you're ready to have an actual relationship with me, one where I'm treated with respect and not just seen as a source of money, I'll be here. Until then, I need space. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I did something I'd never done before. I blocked both their numbers. The silence that followed was absolute. No more waiting for calls that didn't come. No more jumping every time my phone buzzed, hoping it was them. No more agonizing over whether I'd said the wrong thing or failed them somehow. Just silence. And in that silence, finally, I could hear myself think. Chapter 7. The loneliest Christmas December came in with snow. Rare for Seattle. I watched it fall from my living room window, turning the world outside into something clean and unfamiliar. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. Donald and I had hosted elaborate dinners, the house full of laughter and lights, and the smell of cookies baking. The kids had loved it when they were young, rushing down the stairs Christmas morning, squealing with delight at the presents under the tree. But that was years ago, decades ago. Before they grew up and moved away, before Christmas became an obligation they tried to fulfill with the minimum possible effort, before Donald got sick and we stopped decorating because what was the point when it was just the two of us? And then what was the point when it was just me? This year, I didn't even put up a tree. The decorations were still boxed up in the garage, and I couldn't bring myself to open them. Looking at those ornaments, the handmade ones the kids had made in elementary school, the one Donald had bought me on our 10th anniversary, the collection of memories from a life that felt increasingly distant, would have broken me. The 14th came and went. Meadow's wedding day. I spent it at the support group, which Diana had organized as a special Saturday session for anyone who needed company during the holidays. 7 of us showed up, all with similar stories of estranged children and lonely celebrations. "Did you think about going?" Ruth asked me as we drank hot chocolate that Francine had brought from home. "Every minute of the day," I admitted. I kept imagining walking into the venue, seeing Meadow in her wedding dress, maybe having some dramatic reconciliation scene. But that's not real life. Real life is messier. Real life is you respecting the boundary you set, Diana corrected gently. You told them you needed space until they could treat you better. Going to the wedding would have undermined that completely. She was right. But knowing she was right didn't make it hurt less. Somewhere across Lake Washington, my daughter was getting married, and I wasn't there. My son was probably serving as best man or giving a toast or dancing with his sister, and none of them were thinking about me. Or if they were thinking about me, it was probably with anger or resentment, not sadness or regret. That night, I did something impulsive. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a letter to my children. I'd written and deleted dozens of those over the past month. But something else. My story. Our story. Everything that had happened. From the engagement dinner to Wesley showing up at my door to this moment, sitting alone in my cold house on the day my daughter got married without me. I wrote for hours, the words pouring out like water from a burst pipe. I wrote about being a young mother, so sure I was doing everything right. About the sacrifices I'd made without thinking they were sacrifices because that's what mothers did. About watching Donald die and feeling like I was losing not just my husband but my entire identity. About slowly realizing that my children saw me as a means to an end, rather than a person with my own needs and feelings. I wrote about the money, tracking every dollar I'd given them over the years. The $50,000 from the house sale, the $20,000 over the past year alone. Small amounts here and there that added up to a staggering total. I wrote about my current financial situation, about Sarah, the financial advisor, telling me I had 3 years before I'd have nothing left. And I wrote about the breaking point, about finally saying no, about blocking their numbers, about choosing myself for the first time in my adult life, and how terrifying and liberating it felt at the same time. By the time I finished, it was past midnight. Meadow's wedding was over. She was married now, starting a new chapter of her life, and I hadn't been part of it. I saved the document and closed my laptop, exhausted but oddly calm. Christmas itself was quiet. Helen invited me to spend it with her family, and I accepted gratefully. Her daughters were warm and welcoming, treating me like an honored guest rather than an obligation. I watched them interact with Helen, teasing and affectionate but also respectful, listening when she spoke, including her in conversations, making sure she felt valued, and felt a sharp pang of grief for what I didn't have with my own children. I was lucky, Helen told me later as we sat in her living room while her daughters cleaned up the kitchen. My girls aren't perfect, but they've never taken me for granted. I think it's because I never let them. I love them fiercely, but I also taught them early on that I was a person with my own life and my own needs, not just a resource for them to tap. I wish I'd done that, I said quietly. You can still do it now. It's not too late, Lorraine. It won't be easy, and it might not work, but it's not too late. On New Year's Eve, I was home alone again. I'd declined Helen's invitation to a party, preferring the quiet. At midnight, I stood at my living room window and watched fireworks bloom across the Seattle skyline in the distance, bright flowers of light against the dark sky. I thought about all the New Year's Eves I'd spent with Donald, with the kids when they were young, with the family we'd built together, and I thought about this year, 2025, and what I wanted it to be. I couldn't control what Meadow and Wesley did. I couldn't make them love me the way I wanted to be loved. Couldn't force them to see me as more than an ATM or an obligation. But I could control what I did, how I spent my time, who I let into my life, what boundaries I maintained. I could choose to keep living in the fantasy of what my family should have been, or I could start accepting the reality of what it was. I could keep waiting for my children to change, or I could change myself, not for them, but for me. As the fireworks faded and the city grew quiet again, I made a resolution. This year, I would figure out who Lorraine Ashford was when she wasn't being someone's mother or someone's wife. This year, I would build a life that mattered to me, even if it didn't look anything like the life I'd imagined. This year, I would choose myself. Chapter 8. The Unexpected Call. January brought rain. Seattle's default setting after the brief snow. I'd fallen into a new routine over the holiday break. Support group on Wednesdays. Volunteer work at the library on Thursdays. Helen had suggested it and helped me sign up. Long walks around Beacon Hill when the weather allowed. I was lonely, but it was a different kind of loneliness than before. Not the desperate loneliness of waiting for calls that didn't come, but the quiet loneliness of someone learning to be alone. My finances were stabilizing. Without the constant drain of giving money to Meadow and Wesley, I'd actually managed to save a little each month. Not much, but enough to ease the knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for the past year. Sarah, the financial advisor, had been pleased at our follow-up appointment in early January. "You're doing great, Mrs. Ashford. If you keep this up, you'll be in much better shape long-term." "I don't feel great," I'd admitted. "I feel like I abandoned my children." "You didn't abandon them. You stopped enabling them. There's a difference." But the guilt still gnawed at me, especially late at night when the house was quiet and I had nothing to distract me from my thoughts. What kind of mother wasn't at her daughter's wedding? What kind of mother blocked her children's numbers? The voice in my head, the one that sounded like my own mother, like society, like everything I'd been taught about what good mothers did, told me I was selfish, bitter, cruel. Then there was the other voice, quieter but growing stronger, the one that sounded like Diana, like Ruth, like Helen, the one that said I deserved better, that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was self-preservation, that my children were adults who needed to learn that actions had consequences. In late January, something unexpected happened. I was at the library, reshelving books in the history section, when my phone rang. I'd unblocked my children's numbers after Christmas, not because I was ready to talk, but because I'd realized that blocking them was just another form of avoidance. If they wanted to reach me, I'd deal with it. They just hadn't tried. Until now. The call was from a number I didn't recognize, but it had a Seattle area code. I stepped into the quiet corner by the windows and answered. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Keegan. Meadow's husband." The word sent a strange pang through me. My daughter was married, and I'd learned it from her husband, not from her. "Hello, Keegan. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your number from Meadow's phone, but she doesn't know I'm calling. She'd probably be angry if she found out. What's this about?" He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear traffic in the background. He was outside somewhere, maybe on a break from work. I wanted to apologize again, for the engagement dinner, for how you found out, for everything. And I wanted you to know that the wedding was beautiful, but it felt incomplete without you there. The words were kind, but they also hurt. Then maybe you should tell your wife that, not me. I have, multiple times. But Meadow is... He paused, searching for words. "She's very stubborn. She's convinced herself that you're the one who's wrong, that you abandoned her when she needed you most." Needed me or needed my money? Another pause. "I think maybe both, but more than that, I think she's scared." "Scared of what?" "Of admitting she was wrong, of facing what she's done to you. I'm not excusing her behavior, Mrs. Ashford. What she did, what they both did, it wasn't okay. But I thought you should know that she's not as cold as she seems. She cried on our wedding day. When your name came up in the toasts, when someone asked where you were, she locked herself in the bathroom for 15 minutes. I didn't know what to do with this information. Was I supposed to feel bad for her? Sorry that my absence from her wedding, a wedding she'd explicitly told me not to attend, had upset her. Keegan, I appreciate you calling, truly. But if Meadow wants to talk to me, she knows how to reach me. I'm not going to chase after her anymore. I understand. I thought you should know you're not forgotten. And for what it's worth, I think you're incredibly brave." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet library corner for a long time, watching the rain stream down the windows. Brave. Was that what I was? Or was I just a bitter old woman who'd given up on her children? I didn't know anymore. The lines between strength and stubbornness, between boundaries and barriers, felt increasingly blurred. That night at home, I opened the document I'd written on Meadow's wedding day. I'd been adding to it periodically, using it like a journal to process everything that had happened. I reread what I'd written, and one line jumped out at me. "I don't know how to love my children without sacrificing myself, and I don't know how to save myself without losing them." Was that really the choice? Did it have to be so binary? Save myself or save the relationship? But not both. The next Wednesday at support group, I told everyone about Keegan's call. The responses were mixed. Ruth thought I should reach out to Meadow, that maybe this was an opening. Francine thought Keegan was manipulating me, trying to make me feel guilty. Diana, as always, was measured. The question isn't what Keegan wants or what Meadow wants. The question is what you want. If you want to reach out to her, do it. If you want to maintain your boundaries and wait for her to come to you, that's equally valid. But make the decision for yourself, not because you feel obligated or guilty. What did I want? I wanted my daughter back, but not the daughter who treated me like an ATM, not the daughter who lied to me about dinner dates and excluded me from family events. I wanted the little girl who used to crawl into my lap with picture books, who told me I was the best mom in the world, who needed me in a way that wasn't transactional. But that little girl didn't exist anymore. She'd grown into a woman I barely recognized, a woman who'd learned from watching me that mothers were infinite sources of giving who never had needs of their own. And I'd taught her that. I'd modeled it. I'd made myself small and accommodating and endlessly available. And she'd learned that's what mothers were supposed to be. So if I wanted a different relationship with her now, I had to be different. I had to model something else. Self-respect, boundaries, the radical idea that mothers were people too. And that meant not backing down, not giving in, not accepting crumbs and calling it a feast, even if it meant staying alone. Chapter 9. The letter. February was gray and cold. I'd been living in my new normal for 2 months now. No contact with my children, tight budget, small but meaningful connections through the support group and library volunteering. I'd lost weight, partly from stress and partly from eating less to save money. My clothes hung looser, and when I caught my reflection in windows, I sometimes didn't recognize the thin, serious woman looking back at me. On Valentine's Day, Helen invited me to lunch at a small cafe near Pike Place Market. She arrived with a bouquet of tulips, not roses, because us roses are cliché, and a hug that lasted long enough to make my throat tight with unshed tears. "You look tired," she said, not unkindly, once we'd ordered. "I am tired. Of everything. Have you heard from them at all?" I shook my head. Nothing since Keegan's call in January. It's like they've just written me out of their lives. Or maybe they're waiting for you to cave first, seeing who blinks. Is that what this is? Some kind of standoff? Helen stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I think it's more complicated than that. They're used to you being a certain way. Accommodating, giving, always available. You've changed the rules on them, and they don't know how to respond. So they're doing nothing, hoping you'll go back to being who you were. But I can't go back to that. Then don't. But Lorraine, you have to decide what you want the end game to be here. Do you want to reconcile with them eventually? Or have you decided you're better off without them? The question haunted me. What did I want? Every day, I went back and forth. Some mornings, I woke up determined to maintain my boundaries, convinced I was doing the right thing. Other mornings, I woke up aching to hear Meadow's voice, to know how her new marriage was going, to be part of Wesley's life again. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding. I sat down and wrote a letter, not the angry, stream of consciousness document I'd been maintaining, but an actual letter to my children. It took me 3 days and 7 drafts to get it right. Dear Meadow and Wesley, I'm writing this because I don't know if we'll ever have a conversation where I can say these things out loud, and I need to say them. Not because I expect a response or because I want to argue, but because after 71 years on this earth, I've learned that some things need to be spoken or written, even if no one wants to hear them. I love you both. I need you to know that first and foremost. Every decision I've made as your mother, even the ones that hurt you, came from a place of love. But I've come to realize that the way I loved you wasn't healthy, not for you, and certainly not for me. I taught you, through my actions, that mothers are infinite wells of giving who never run dry and never have needs of their own. I taught you that my time, my money, my emotional energy were always available, always free, always yours for the taking. I never set boundaries or said no because I thought that's what good mothers did. I thought if I gave enough, loved enough, sacrificed enough, you would always want me in your lives. But that's not how it works. By never setting boundaries, I didn't teach you to value me. I taught you to take me for granted. By always saying yes, I didn't create gratitude. I created expectation. And now, when I've finally tried to say no, tried to ask for basic respect and consideration, you've responded by cutting me out of your lives entirely. The engagement dinner hurt, not just because I was excluded, but because you lied to me about it. You could have been honest. You could have said, "Mom, we want this to be small, just us." I would have been hurt, but I would have understood. Instead, you deliberately misled me, and then tried to make me think I was losing my memory. That cruelty, more than anything else, made me realize something had to change. I'm not writing this to make you feel guilty, or to ask for an apology, though both of those things would be nice. I'm writing this because I need you to understand. I can't go back to how things were. I can't go back to being someone who exists solely to meet your needs while mine are ignored. I can't go back to giving you money I don't have while I eat cheap soup and keep my heat turned down to save on bills. I can't go back to waiting by the phone for calls that only come when you need something. I miss you both terribly. I think about you every day. I wanted to be at your wedding, Meadow. I wanted to see you in your dress, to meet Keegan properly, to celebrate one of the most important days of your life, but you told me not to come, and I respected that boundary even though it broke my heart. I'm still your mother. I will always be your mother. But I'm also a person who deserves to be treated with kindness and respect, a person who has her own needs and limitations, a person who can't pour from an empty cup anymore. If you ever want to have a real relationship with me, one where we both give and both receive, one where I'm seen as more than just a source of money or obligation, I'm here. My door is always open, but it has to be different. I can't survive another few years of what we had before. I hope you're both happy. I hope your lives are full and rich and everything you dreamed they would be. And I hope, someday, there might be room in those lives for me, not as the mother I was, but as the person I'm trying to become. With all my love, Mom. I read the letter at least 20 times, changing small words, adjusting the tone. It felt important to get it right. Not perfect, but honest. Finally, on a rainy Saturday afternoon, I printed 2 copies, addressed 2 envelopes, and walked to the mailbox at the end of my street. My hand shook as I dropped them in. The metallic clang of the mailbox closing felt final, irrevocable. I'd said what I needed to say. Now all I could do was wait. Chapter 10. The response. 2 weeks passed with no response to my letter. I hadn't really expected one, but I'd hoped. Every day, I checked my mailbox, nothing but bills and junk mail. Every night, I checked my phone, no calls, no texts. The silence continued, heavy and absolute. Life went on. I picked up more hours at the library, grateful for the distraction and the small paycheck that helped ease my budget. I went to my support group. I had dinner with Helen twice. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I learned to be alone without feeling quite so lonely. On a Tuesday morning in late February, I woke to find an envelope that had been slipped under my door sometime during the night. My name was written on it in handwriting I recognized immediately. Wesley's Cramped, Engineers Printing. My hands shook as I opened it. Mom, I got your letter. I've read it probably 10 times now, and I still don't know what to say. Part of me wants to argue with you, to defend myself, to point out all the ways you're wrong, but the bigger part of me knows that you're not wrong. Not completely. Anyway, I've been thinking a lot about the night I came to your house and demanded you give Meadow a wedding gift. I was so sure I was right, so convinced that you were being unreasonable. But driving back to Portland, I kept thinking about your face when I said we didn't want you at the wedding. I've never seen you look like that before. Like something inside you just broke. I talked to Portia about everything. She's been saying for a while now that we don't treat you right. But I didn't want to listen. It's hard to hear that you're not a good son. You know? It's easier to tell myself that we're fine, that you're fine, that everything is normal. But it's not normal, is it? Normal sons don't only call their mothers when they need money. Normal sons don't drive 3 hours to demand a wedding gift. Normal sons remember their mothers' birthdays and call, just to check in and treat their parents like actual people instead of ATMs with feelings. I don't have an excuse for how I've behaved. I could say I was busy or stressed, or that I didn't realize what I was doing, but those are all just excuses. The truth is, you always made everything so easy for us. You always said yes, always gave us whatever we asked for, always put us first. And somewhere along the way, I started expecting that, instead of appreciating it. I can't speak for Meadow. She's still really angry at you, still convinced that you abandoned her. But I can speak for myself. I'm sorry. Mom, I'm sorry for taking you for granted, for treating your generosity like it was owed to me, for only calling when I needed something. I'm sorry for not being there for you after Dad died, for not checking in more, for not seeing that you were struggling. I don't know if this changes anything. I don't know if it's enough. But I wanted you to know that I heard you. I read your letter and I heard you, and I'm trying to do better. Can we maybe talk sometime? No money stuff, no obligations, just talk. Wesley, I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't perfect. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. It was acknowledgement, accountability, an opening towards something different. I picked up my phone and unblocked Wesley's number. Then I called him. He answered on the second ring. Mom? Hi, honey. There was a long silence, and then I heard him crying. My son, 39 years old, crying on the phone. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know you are. We talked for an hour. Really talked. In a way we hadn't in years. He told me about his life, about his struggles with his job, about his marriage to Portia. I told him about my life, about the support group, about the volunteer work, about learning to live on my own. We didn't solve everything. There were still hard conversations ahead, still trust to rebuild, but it was a start. What about Meadow? I asked finally. Have you talked to her? Wesley sighed. She's having a hard time with all of this. She feels attacked by your letter. She thinks you're trying to make her feel guilty. I'm not trying to make her feel guilty. I'm trying to make her understand. I know, but Meadow doesn't see it that way. She's always been more stubborn than me, more defensive. I think she's scared of facing what she's done. It's easier to be angry at you than to admit she was wrong. My heart ached for my daughter, even through my hurt. I knew what it was like to be scared of your own mistakes, to build walls around yourself rather than face uncomfortable truths. I'd done it myself for years, telling myself everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Will you tell her something for me? I asked. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm here whenever she's ready. But also tell her that I meant what I said in my letter. I can't go back to how things were. I'll tell her. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and let myself feel everything. Grief, relief, hope, fear, all of it tangled together in a mess I couldn't sort out. One son had come back. Would my daughter follow? Or had I lost her for good? I didn't know. But for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. Not back to what we were, but towards something new. Something honest. Something real. It wouldn't be easy. It might not even work. But it was a chance. And that was more than I'd had yesterday. Chapter 11. Small steps forward march brought the first hints of spring. Crocuses pushing through the wet ground. Longer daylight hours. The smell of rain mixed with earth. Wesley and I had been talking regularly, once a week at first, then more often. The conversations were still sometimes awkward, still careful in places, but they were real. He told me about work stress, about arguing with Portia over wanting kids, about feeling overwhelmed by adult life. I told him about my financial fears, about the support group, about learning that being alone didn't have to mean being lonely. Can I ask you something? He said one evening in mid-March. Why didn't you ever tell us how bad things were financially? If we'd known, Would it have changed anything? I interrupted gently. He was quiet. I'd like to think so, but honestly, probably not. We were too focused on ourselves to notice. The honesty hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that comes with healing, like cleaning out an infected wound. It has to hurt before it can get better. Wesley drove up to visit in late March, alone. Portia stayed in Portland, giving us space to reconnect without the complication of other people. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, older and tired-looking but still my son, I started crying. He hugged me, and we stood in the doorway for a long moment, holding on to each other. We spent the day together. I made lunch. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and soup. And we sat at my small kitchen table and talked. Really talked. The way we hadn't in more than a decade. He told me about the pressure he felt to be successful, to prove himself, to live up to some impossible standard he'd set for himself. I told him about feeling invisible, about the loneliness of widowhood, about the fear of being a burden. "I don't want you to be afraid to need things," Wesley said. "I know I made you feel like you couldn't ask for help, like the relationship only went one direction. But I want to do better. I want to actually be your son, not just someone who takes from you. Actions speak louder than words," I said, echoing something Diana had told me. "I know, which is why..." He pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. It's not everything I owe you, not even close, but it's a start." Inside was a check for $5,000. I stared at it, shocked. "Wesley, I can't..." "You can. You lent me money when I needed it. This is me paying you back. It's not charity. It's not pity. It's just paying back a debt." I looked at my son, seeing him clearly maybe for the first time in years. He was trying, really trying. It didn't erase the past, didn't make up for everything, but it mattered. It was a tangible acknowledgement that things had been wrong, and he was trying to make them right. "Thank you," I said quietly. "There's something else." He hesitated, then continued. "I talked to Meadow, multiple times actually. She's still angry, still insisting you were wrong, but I think she's starting to crack. I think she misses you, Mom. She just doesn't know how to admit it." My heart clenched. "Did she read my letter? She says she threw it away, but Keegan told me she kept it. He found it in her desk drawer, all folded up, so she read it. She just doesn't want to admit it affected her." I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to reach out to Meadow immediately, to bridge the gap between us, but I knew that would be a mistake. She needed to come to me, needed to take that step herself. If I chased after her now, we'd just fall back into the old pattern. Me accommodating, her taking. Nothing fundamentally changed. Before Wesley left that evening, he hugged me again. "I love you, Mom. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. And I'm going to do better. I promise. I love you too, honey." April came, and with it, my 72nd birthday. Wesley called to wish me happy birthday and told me a gift was coming in the mail. Helen took me out to dinner. The support group sang to me, awkwardly, off-key, but sincerely. It wasn't a big celebration, but it felt more genuine than birthdays had in years, when Meadow and Wesley would send obligatory texts and maybe, if I was lucky, a card. The gift from Wesley arrived 2 days later, a beautiful cashmere scarf in deep blue, along with a card that said simply, "Because you deserve nice things. Love, Wesley and Portia." I wore it the next day to the library, and when Helen complimented it, I found myself tearing up. "That bad?" Helen joked, but her eyes were kind. "That good," I corrected. It's been so long since either of them gave me something without expecting something in return. It feels, I don't know, like maybe things really are changing. "One son is changing," Helen reminded me gently, "but you've still got a daughter who's holding on to her anger. Don't forget that." She was right. While Wesley and I were slowly rebuilding, Meadow remained absent. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like I had one child instead of two, and the missing one left a meadow-shaped hole in my life that nothing could fill. Then, on a gray Wednesday in late April, something happened. I was at the support group, talking about Wesley's progress and Meadow's continued absence, when my phone rang. Unknown number, but Seattle area code. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned to be wary of unknown numbers, but something made me step into the hallway and pick up. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Dr. Patricia Ningyan at Swedish Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter, Meadow Chen." My heart stopped. What happened? Is she okay? She's stable now, but she was brought in last night with severe abdominal pain. We performed an emergency appendectomy. She's going to be fine, but she's asking for you. She doesn't have anyone listed as her emergency contact except her husband, and he's out of town on a business trip. He won't be back until tomorrow. I'll be there in 30 minutes. I ran back into the group room, grabbed my coat, and explained to Diana what had happened. She hugged me quickly. Go. Be careful. Call if you need anything. The bus ride to Swedish Hospital felt interminable. I kept thinking about Meadow, alone in a hospital room, in pain, scared, despite everything, despite all the hurt and anger and distance between us. She was still my daughter. She was still the little girl who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms, who held my hand crossing the street, who told me all her secrets. When I finally reached her room, I paused outside the door, suddenly nervous. What if she was angry I'd come? What if she didn't really want me there? But then I heard her voice, weak and scared, calling for the nurse, and I couldn't stop myself. I opened the door and stepped inside.